If you've spent any time watching this channel, then you already know the Middle Ages offered plenty of horrifying ways for a person to die. So today, we're diving right into another subject that, according to the analytics, you wonderfully disturbed people keep asking me to cover. This time, I'm taking you back through history to meet a few medieval people whose lives ended in truly dark and heartbreaking ways. Welcome to Medieval Madness. Sometimes all it takes is being in the wrong place at exactly the wrong moment. Toward the end of the 13th century, the town of Laon in northern France was shaken by several violent uprisings. On a Saturday in February of 1295, two noble men-at-arms, John d'Ecourt and John d'Anjou, became involved in a bitter dispute with the city's deputy mayor, John d'Emily. Things quickly got out of control when d'Anjou punched the deputy mayor square in the face. In response, d'Emily's servants rushed in and gave both men a brutal beating. Knowing they probably wouldn't receive any mercy, the two fled to the sanctuary of Laon Cathedral. They were joined by Peter d'Ecourt, John's brother, who served as a church clerk. Believing the cathedral offered the safest refuge they could find, the three men withdrew deep inside the building. They were given shelter in the vaulted belfry, where they remained for the night, hoping the danger would pass. By early Sunday morning, however, the people of Laon had gathered outside the cathedral in anger. They were furious that the clergy had allowed the fugitives to remain inside, so a large crowd surrounded the church and waited for them to come out. The three men refused to leave their sanctuary. As the morning prayers and hymns were underway, an armed mob forced its way into the cathedral. They overwhelmed the king's guards who had been assigned to protect the church, then fought their way toward the belfry. After smashing through the heavy bolted doors, they finally reached the men hiding inside. The dean tried to stop the attackers, but his efforts made no difference. The mob seized both men-at-arms along with Peter, dragging all three from what had seemed like a place of safety. They were beaten so badly inside the cathedral that blood stained the church itself, violating the sacred sanctuary that was supposed to protect them. The attackers then grabbed the prisoners by their hair and dragged them through the streets while striking them over and over again. As an angry crowd followed behind, anyone who wanted to join the assault was free to do so. The three men endured a relentless attack, suffering blows from fists, stones, sticks, and bladed weapons as the violence continued around them. John and Peter d'Ecourt were eventually left lying in the street, barely alive after the savage beating. John d'Anjou, however, was taken away to the town's common jail instead. There he was tortured, and his feet and tendons were slashed. He survived only a few more days before finally dying from the terrible injuries he had suffered. During the Middle Ages, treason was considered one of the worst crimes a person could commit. In 1302, a Flemish nobleman named Simon Hannibar was found guilty of betraying the crown. His punishment wasn't just severe, it was almost unimaginable. Instead of facing a single execution method, he was condemned to endure two of the harshest punishments of the medieval world. One of those punishments was being broken on the wheel. To carry out the sentence, the executioner would secure the condemned person to a large wagon wheel with their arms and legs stretched outward. Using a heavy iron bar or hammer, he would strike the prisoner's limbs through the gaps in the wheel, shattering the bones one after another. Another version of the execution used wooden blocks arranged on the ground to match the shape of a wheel. The victim was tied across them, and the executioner carefully worked upward from the feet, delivering blow after blow until the bones in the legs and arms had been broken in sequence. If fortune happened to be on your side, the executioner might finish the ordeal with one final strike to the head or neck, ending your suffering. If not, the broken body would often be lifted onto the wheel and displayed in the air, where the victim would slowly die over the course of hours or even days. Simon Hannibar was not one of the fortunate ones. After enduring the agony of being broken on the wheel and being removed as little more than a crushed and mangled body, his punishment still wasn't over. He was then subjected to a second brutal sentence, being drawn and quartered. Brunhild of Austrasia served as queen consort to King Sigebert I, and, over the course of nearly 70 years, she became one of the most powerful and influential women in the Frankish kingdoms. She ruled over Austrasia and Burgundy, leaving a lasting mark on both realms. She's perhaps best remembered for her bitter rivalry with Queen Fredegund of Neustria, a feud that became legendary. According to historical accounts, Fredegund was believed to have arranged the murders of both Brunhild's sister and her first husband, turning their conflict into one of the bloodiest power struggles of the age. After those tragedies, Brunhild continued to hold power as regent for her sons, grandsons, and eventually her great-grandson. During her years of leadership, she built strong relationships with influential church figures such as Gregory the Great and Gregory of Tours, helping shape the spread and development of Catholic Christianity throughout the Frankish kingdoms. In the end, however, even her political skill couldn't save her. It took the combined strength of the dukes from two allied kingdoms to overcome the forces of Austrasia. Once Brunhild and the young Austrasian king were finally captured, the young king was executed almost immediately. According to one medieval account, then the armies of the Franks and Burgundians united as one, and together they cried out that death was the only fitting punishment for the exceedingly wicked Brunhild, despite her advanced age. King Clothar then ordered that Brunhild be placed on the back of a camel and paraded before the entire army, making a public spectacle of her defeat. After the procession ended, she was tied to the legs of wild horses, which pulled in different directions until her life came to a brutal end. Even after her death, the punishment did not end. Her remains were placed on a funeral fire, and her bones were burned to ashes. Inalchuk served as the governor of Otrar in the Khwarezm Empire of Central Asia during the early 13th century. His name became famous for one decision that changed the course of history. When Genghis Khan sent a large trade delegation to Otrar, Inalchuk ordered that the merchants' goods be confiscated and that the entire group be executed. As you can probably imagine, Genghis Khan did not take that lightly. The death of even a single envoy was considered enough to justify war, but ordering the deaths of roughly 450 merchants and envoys wasn't just an insult, it was a direct challenge. Genghis responded the only way he knew how. He gathered his massive Mongol army and marched on Otrar. The Mongols reached the city's walls in 1219 and immediately began a full-scale siege. As the defenses collapsed, Inalchuk retreated into the city's inner fortress with several hundred loyal defenders, preparing for one final stand. Because Genghis Khan had specifically ordered that Inalchuk be captured alive, the Mongols couldn't simply kill him during the assault. Instead, they slowly and methodically fought their way through the city over the course of about a month, while Inalchuk's remaining soldiers launched desperate attacks that often amounted to suicide missions. In the end, their determination wasn't enough. Cornered on the upper levels of the fortress, the defenders ran out of weapons and resorted to tearing bricks from the walls, hurling them down at the advancing Mongols in a final act of resistance. Eventually, the siege came to an end. Inalchuk was captured alive, placed in chains, and taken away as the city itself was destroyed. According to one historical account, his execution was especially infamous. It claims that molten silver was poured into his eyes and ears, a punishment said to symbolize both revenge and public disgrace. Whether every detail of that account is completely accurate is still debated by historians, but the story has survived for centuries as a warning of what could happen to anyone who crossed Genghis Khan. The Inferno is the opening section of Dante's 14th century masterpiece, The Divine Comedy. In it, Dante imagines himself traveling through hell while being guided by the ancient Roman poet Virgil. In Canto 33, the two come across a horrifying scene. They find two condemned souls trapped together in the same icy pit, with only their heads rising above the surface. One of those men, Count Ugolino, is condemned to spend eternity gnawing on the head of the man beside him. The vivid description of Ugolino's prophetic dream and the heartbreaking suffering of his children came from Dante's own imagination. Those parts belong to literature. The real events that inspired the story, however, were tragic enough on their own. Count Ugolino della Gherardesca of Donoratico was an Italian nobleman, a respected naval commander, and an influential politician. In 1288, the city of Pisa was torn apart by unrest caused by severe food shortages. During one violent clash, Ugolino killed the nephew of the city's archbishop. The archbishop used the incident to accuse Ugolino of treason, turning the people of Pisa against him. Before long, Ugolino, along with one of his sons and several of his grandsons, was arrested and imprisoned inside the Tower of Muda. In March of 1289, the archbishop declared himself podestà, placing himself in the highest political office in the city. Instead of allowing food to continue being delivered to the prisoners, as had been done before, he ordered the tower to be completely sealed. The keys were then thrown into the Arno River, ensuring no one could easily open the prison again. Locked inside with no hope of rescue and no supplies, the men and boys were abandoned to one of the slowest and cruelest deaths imaginable, starving to death over time. Evil deeds. During the 100 Years' War, in the summer of 1358, northern France was shaken by a major peasant uprising known as the Jacquerie. Although the rebellion lasted only about 2 months, it left behind a legacy of violence that people remembered for generations. The revolt began in a small village, where a group of peasants gathered to talk about what they believed was the nobility's betrayal of King John II at the Battle of Poitiers. After the English army, led by Edward the Black Prince, defeated the French forces and captured the king, many ordinary people felt their rulers had failed them. One of the medieval chroniclers who described these events was the 14th century writer Jean le Bel. His account paints a grim picture of the rebellion and the violence that accompanied it. He even admitted that some of the stories were so disturbing that he hesitated to record them. As he wrote, "I would not dare write or tell of their atrocious deeds or of the indecorous things they did to ladies." Among the most shocking stories he included was the claim that the rebels killed a knight, placed his body on a roasting spit, and cooked it while his wife and children were forced to watch. The account goes on to claim that, after assaulting the knight's wife, the attackers intended to force the family to eat the roasted flesh of their husband and father. Whether those events happened exactly as described remains uncertain. Many historians believe that medieval chroniclers often exaggerated or emphasized such stories to portray their enemies as completely monstrous. Tales involving sexual violence and cannibalism carried powerful symbolic meaning at the time, presenting the rebels as people who had abandoned all morality and deserved no sympathy. The violence of the period was not limited to the wealthy or the nobility. During another uprising in France, this one carried out by a group known as the Touchans, workers and artisans in the south rebelled against the heavy taxes imposed to finance the king's war. One of the unfortunate victims was a priest who happened to cross their path while traveling to the papal court in Rome. According to the chroniclers, the rebels attacked him because of their hatred and distrust of the church. They wrote that the priest suffered terrible abuse before ultimately being killed by the mob. Like many accounts from the Middle Ages, the exact details are difficult to verify today. Even so, these stories reflect the fear, anger, and brutality that often accompanied periods of war, rebellion, and social unrest during medieval Europe. György Dosa was a man-at-arms from Transylvania in the Kingdom of Hungary. In the early 16th century, during the reign of King Vladislaus II, he rose to lead a massive peasant uprising against the Hungarian nobility. The rebellion was eventually crushed in 1514, when Dosa's forces were defeated by an army numbering around 20,000 men. After the battle, he was captured alive, and the punishment waiting for him became one of the most infamous executions in medieval history. Because Dosa had been accused of trying to become a peasant king, his captors turned that accusation into a cruel form of public humiliation. They placed him on an iron throne that was gradually heated until the metal became dangerously hot. A red-hot iron crown was forced onto his head, and a burning scepter was placed into his hands, mocking the symbols of royalty he was said to have sought. He was forced to endure this torment for more than an hour. After that, the executioners used red-hot pincers to tear at his flesh while the punishment continued before a gathered crowd. According to contemporary accounts, hymns were sung and musicians played throughout the execution, adding an eerie sense of ceremony to the spectacle. A group of Dosa's followers, who had been deliberately starved beforehand, were then brought forward. Historical accounts claim they were forced to participate in an act of unimaginable cruelty involving their dying leader. Those who refused were immediately executed, while those who obeyed were spared. Dosa finally died after enduring prolonged agony. Even then, the punishment was not considered complete. His body was quartered, and the remains were sent to different parts of Hungary, where they were displayed publicly as a warning to anyone else who might think about leading another rebellion. Balthazar Gerard was born in the county of Burgundy, in what is now eastern France. In 1580, King Philip II of Spain announced an enormous reward of 25,000 crowns, along with a noble title and lands, for anyone who could capture or kill William the Silent, the leader of the Dutch revolt. In John Lothrop Motley's The Rise of the Dutch Republic, William is described as a pest to all Christianity and the enemy of the human race. Balthazar Gerard decided he would be the man to claim that reward. He succeeded in shooting William the Silent, becoming the first known person to assassinate a head of state with a handheld firearm. But his escape didn't last long. He was quickly captured, and the punishment that followed was intended to be as severe as possible. His sentence began with a public flogging while he was suspended from a pole. After that, according to historical accounts, honey was spread over his wounds, and a goat was brought in to repeatedly lick them with its rough tongue. That first night he was left tightly bound, making it nearly impossible for him to sleep. Over the following 3 days, he was repeatedly suspended with his hands tied behind his back while heavy weights were fastened to his toes, increasing the strain on his body. The torture continued when he was forced to wear shoes made from uncured dog skin. The shoes had been intentionally made too small, and when he was placed close to a fire, the leather shrank even further, crushing his feet. Contemporary accounts state that when the shoes were finally removed, much of the damaged skin came away with them. His ordeal did not end there. Historical records describe additional punishments, including branding and other forms of torture, all intended to prolong his suffering before the final execution. Eventually, Gerard was taken to the market square in Delft to face his death. According to the official sentence, his execution would involve multiple stages of punishment before he was finally beheaded. Contemporary sources describe it as one of the harshest judicial sentences ever recorded in early modern Europe. Despite everything he had endured, several witnesses claimed that Gerard remained remarkably composed. One account even noted that, although he was severely injured by the time he climbed the scaffold, he appeared unexpectedly calm. That brings us to the end of this episode of Medieval Madness. If you enjoyed the video and would like to support the channel, I'd really appreciate you checking out our Patreon, where I post an exclusive extra video every month. You can also join our YouTube memberships if you'd rather support the channel here on YouTube and get the same bonus content. For anyone who wants to go a little further, there's also a higher membership tier that lets your name appear on screen at the end of videos, just like the awesome supporters you're seeing right now. Thanks so much for watching and for supporting the channel. It truly means a lot to me. As always, I'll see you next week with another video. Take care, and cheers.